On today's episode, I'm going to preview all of the Week 10 matchups, plus all my starts and sits for Week 10, coming right up. And what is up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football podcast for Friday, November 13th, 2020. And I'm Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So, please just subscribe, support the show, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes. And on today's episode, we're going to go over all the Week 10 matchups and all of my start-sit advice for Week 10. But before we get into all the Week 10 matchups, let's kind of talk about the Thursday Night Football game. And raise your hand if you started an A.J. Brown or Ryan Tannehill or even Jonathan Taylor. I mean, this was ugly. If you started any of those players, you had a pretty rough start to your Week 10 matchups. And, man, it was just a very interesting game. I mean, the Colts are a good team, don't get me wrong. But the Tennessee Titans was a home game, and they lost this game 34-17 to the Colts. And man, just a very lopsided game. Just not very explosive in the offense that you're expecting from the Titans. And man, just a lopsided game. But you gotta give credit where credit's due. Like I said in the podcast yesterday, the Colts have a very good defense. I think it's very underrated on how good they are. And some of these guys that I had you had played in this game last night, you were kind of concerned about because it was such a bad matchup for the offense for the Titans. But you had to go in there and start your Ryan Tannehills, your Derrick Henrys, your A.J. Browns. You just had to play those guys. You can't bench those guys. So with that being the case, I mean, it was just a very low fantasy outing for some of the players that you had started in this matchup. And, looking at some of the stats, I mean, Philip Rivers, he threw for 308 yards and a touchdown. Not the greatest stats, but he didn't have any turnovers, which was good. Ryan Tannehill, he had 147 yards and one touchdown, so very, very quiet game from him. When it comes to rushing for the Titans, I mean, Derrick Henry, he had 19 carries for 103 yards, but the problem is that the Titans were down going into the fourth quarter, and they were still trying to run the ball. Sometimes you have to stay true to yourself. You have to continue. If you have a good run game, at any moment, Derrick Henry can break off for a 60-yard touchdown. But when you're down like that, you have to try to move the ball down the field and just press it down the field, pass the ball. But it just wasn't in the favor. It wasn't in the game script this week for the Titans. They just couldn't score points. But at least Derrick Henry, if you are in a standard league, you got 10 points out of him based on his rushing yards, so not terrible. And on the Colts side of the ball, this was very interesting too, because like I had said yesterday in the podcast, that it's very hard to determine what the breakdown of carries will be for the Colts. And we saw it yesterday where, I had ranked it where I thought, you start Jonathan Taylor because he is the starter. And then, Nyheim Hines was a good flex because he's involved in the game, in the game scripts as well. And then Jordan Wilkins would be the third guy in line. So you look at what happened last night. Nyheim Hines, man, he had 12 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown. And then he had another 5 catches for 45 yards and a touchdown. I mean, he had a great game. And then you look at what Jonathan Taylor did. Jonathan Taylor had 7 carries for 12 yards, 1.7 yards per carry. I mean, just a awful game for Jonathan Taylor. Jordan Wilkins, he had 8 carries. So even still, Jonathan Taylor has not gained more carries than Jordan Wilkins. So it's getting frustrating if you're a Jonathan Taylor owner because you're expecting high things from him this year, and it's not panning out. When it comes to the receiving, Corey Davis led the Titans with a 5-catch night with 67 yards on 6 targets. A.J. Brown, he had 1 catch for 21 yards and 4 targets. He caught a ball in the first quarter and then didn't do anything the rest of the game. And I get it, the Colts are a good pass defense, but A.J. Brown played the Bears last week, and he had a great game. So just very disappointed. I started A.J. Brown. He's my Tyreek Hill's out, but A.J. Brown's my number 2 wide receiver. And it's just discouraging when you are excited about your players playing, and then they put up points like that. But just a weird game from the Titans overall. I mean, Jonnu Smith, he only had 2 catches for 14 yards, but he had a rushing touchdown. So that was something that was encouraging if you played Smith. Then on the Colts side of the ball, Michael Pittman Jr., he was a guy that I had mentioned to pick up on the waiver wire. He was a guy that wasn't going to play. He was a guy that I wanted to see what he did when T.Y. Hilton was back. And he led the team with 7 catches over 100 yards. So he had 8 targets. So we see the change of guard, the fact that Michael Pittman could be the guy that is going to get majority of the carries or the target share for the Colts. And a second on the list was Nyheim Hines. He had 5 catches, 45 yards, like I mentioned, and a touchdown. And T.Y. Hilton, he was 4 for 40 for 5 targets. I would never expected him to have a better game than A.J. Brown. So just a weird game overall for the Titans offense. And the Colts stay alive. In the AFC South, they're 6-3. The Titans are 6-3. So kudos to the Colts going in there and getting that win on Thursday night. So hopefully, if you play some of these players, you're gonna be able to recover with the rest of your roster, which you should be able to based on your roster structure. But it's just discouraging to see players get single digits, especially in a PPR league when you may need to win. So hopefully it turns around this weekend, but just a kind of a slow start. But with that being the case, let's get on to some of the matchups for Week 10. And I'm going to start off with the Bucks versus the Carolina Panthers. The Bucks are going to this game as 4.5-point favorites. The over-under is 50.5 points. And the Bucks had a embarrassing loss on Sunday. And I think this is going to be a game where they kind of redeem themselves. The Panthers, they're division rivals, so you can never take them too lightly. I do think that just overall, the Bucks are a better team. They got a decent enough defense, so I think they could at least do some good against this team. But when it comes to fantasy, the must-starts of this game, I still got Tom Brady as a must-start. Now, I put Teddy Bridgewater in this list, because it's only if you have a 2-quarterback league. So if you're not in a 2-quarterback league, you're not playing Teddy Bridgewater against the Bucks. But if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you have to play him because I don't think you have a better option. But it is a tough matchup. He's more of a QB2 this week. So just have your expectations altered a little bit because it is a tough matchup for Teddy Bridgewater and the Panthers. But at running back, you're starting Mike Davis. You can play Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. I think they're both startable pieces. At wide receiver, Robbie Anderson, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, Mike Evans. They're all startable pieces. At tight end, you're starting Gronk. And when it comes to people in the flex, I think Curtis Samuel has more flex appeal in this game than anything else. Now with Christian McCaffrey down, does Curtis Samuel get some more touches, in the backfield? Is he more involved, or does he stay involved like he has been? Now, I think he could be a decent enough play because he's had 3 weeks in a row where he's done decent, in fantasy. So I think that he is a flex consideration this week. And for my boom bust candidate, I have Antonio Brown. I don't think he's a guy that you must start. I think this is a wait and see what he looks like in this offense. Some people were very quick to start Antonio Brown last week, and you got bit by that. So I think it's something you want to kind of see how he's involved, what his target share is like, and go from there because they have some pretty good corners in Carolina. So it's not like it's just a walk in the park. I do think that they could, one of these receivers on the Bucks will emerge. It's a matter of who's going to be. So Antonio Brown, I think that he's obviously a fun guy to want to have on your roster, but is it the smart move based on if you're trying to win? If I am able to handle the points on my bench, if he does well, if you're not in a must-win situation where you have Antonio Brown, I think it's safe. You can keep him on your bench, see what he does, and then if you start to see the production coming, then be more comfortable playing him. But I just think he's more of a boom bust than anything else this week. And then moving on to the Houston Texans versus Cleveland Browns. This is a 53-point over-under. The Browns are favored by 3 points. And honestly, there's not really... there's a decent amount of starting players in this game. I think that, Baker Mayfield, I think he's a good streamer this week. He's a guy that's going against a Houston Texans defense that's very, very bad overall. They gave up over 400 yards overall on offense. They give up a lot of points to the tight end. So I think that when it comes to Baker Mayfield, he definitely could have a decent game this week. Obviously, you're starting Deshaun Watson at running back. Nick Chubb has returned to practice, so Nick Chubb should get the start on Sunday, which means that you can start Nick Chubb. You can still start Kareem Hunt. I think they're a good 1-2 punch. Duke Johnson, if he's playing in substitution for David Johnson, I think Duke Johnson's a good start. And then wide receiver, you're playing Will Fuller, you're playing Brandon Cooks. Jarvis Landry, he becomes a decent option just because OBJ is now out for the season. And then at tight end, I have Austin Hooper as a good start. They're like 20. The Texans are 22nd against the tight end position, so I do think that Austin Hooper could have a sneaky game. Hopefully he gets the more snaps. So hopefully he gets the more routes run. I hope everything is in his favor because they've been using Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. So hopefully this is going to be a game where Austin Hooper actually does something, is involved. And then when it comes to the sits in this game, I have David Johnson. He obviously is in a concussion protocol, and as of Thursday, he was still in that concussion protocol. So obviously, the later down the line of the week that the players go into the concussion protocol, the less likely they're going to play. So I don't think David Johnson's playing this week. But like every Saturday, I do my injury update video on YouTube with all the updated information that I have based on what's coming through. So just check that out on Saturday if you're wondering about some of these players that are on the fringe of playing this week. And then my boom bust candidate for this game is Rashard Higgins. Rashard Higgins was a waiver wire pickup a couple weeks ago. People dropped him because they had a very bad game against the Raiders based on the wind, the rain, and all that going on. So I think that this will be a better game based on the sense of like what we'll see from Rashard Higgins in this offense. Now, it's supposed to rain on Sunday in Cleveland, so it's still might be a great game, but I do think that Rashard Higgins could be that boom bust guy if you need somebody to plug and play, that you need a pivot because someone is on a bye week or whatever. So very interesting to kind of see what he'll do this week. And then moving on to the Washington football team versus the Detroit Lions. Now the over under is 46.5, and the Lions are favored by 3.5 points. In this game, you're starting Matthew Stafford, and for Alex Smith, I think if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you have to play him. I have to play him in one of my leagues because I have Patrick Mahomes on a bye. So he's a guy that I had picked up off waivers and going to start with him and Derek Carr on my 2 quarterbacks this week. So I think that you can play him if you desperately need help at your quarterback position. Now I do have Antonio Gibson in this as a must start as well. Now he's been dealing with some nagging injuries, so he did participate in practice on Thursday, but he is a guy that I'm going to start, but obviously that could change based on how he practices on Friday and Saturday as well. I think DeAndre Swift, he's a good start this week. Terry McLaurin, you're starting him. Now I think for the sits in this game, obviously you're sitting Adrian Peterson. I think that DeAndre Swift has now become the go-to guy in the backfield, so I think Adrian Peterson's value starts to kind of decrease. But the problem with Adrian Peterson, if he gets the goal line work and gets a touchdown, that's going to be very frustrating because obviously you want DeAndre Swift to get those carries, but Adrian Peterson is not a guy that you can expect to get a lot of points. And then Kenny Golladay, he's still injured. It looks like he's not going to play, so obviously he should be on your bench. When it comes to the flex in this game, I think J.D. McKissic, like I've mentioned in previous podcasts, he had gotten 14 targets last week. So he's involved. He kind of reminds me of like Chris Thompson a couple years ago, where he wasn't an every down back, but he had a lot of fantasy relevance because he caught a lot of balls out of the backfield, and he was a PPR monster. So I think McKissic has a good chance to have a good flex appeal option this week. And then Marvin Jones, I think if Kenny Galladay's out, Marvin Jones becomes a flex play. He got a touchdown last week, and I think that, based on what they need from the receivers, I think Marvin Jones will be, a guy that's being fed. So I think Marvin Jones has some flex appeal in this game. And then going on to the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Green Bay Packers. Now this is an over-under of 51.5, and the Packers are favored by 13 points in this game. Now, obviously you're starting Aaron in this game at quarterback. Now Jake Luton, it's one of those things where, like I say, if you're in a 2 quarterback league, you may have to play him. It's a good matchup for him. So I think that will he have a 300 passing game and a 2 touchdown game like he did last week? We don't know that, but it was definitely encouraging to see him do well against, the team last week. And then Aaron Jones, you're playing him. James Robinson, I think this is a great play for you this week. I think James Robinson can get it done. Like we just saw Dalvin Cook just shred this defense. I'm not saying James Robinson will do this, but my only fear for James Robinson this week is that if they get too far behind against the Packers, will they take him out of the game and they'll put Chris Thompson in? So that's the only thing. But hopefully he'll get a good outing this week. Obviously, you're starting Devontae Adams. I think DJ Chark you can play. I think it was encouraging to see what him and Jake Luton did last week. So I feel comfortable starting DJ Chark in this game. And then I don't really have any sits or any flex options in this game. But for boom bust candidates, I have Marquez Valdez-Scantling on this list because we have no idea if there's some reports that Allen Lazard should come back in week 10. But if he doesn't, then does MVS have the same week he did last week? I mean, he had 2 touchdowns last week, but does that continue this week? I don't want to chase the points. I'd rather still have MVS on my bench because I don't want to get burned. But I understand why you have to play him if he's your best option. And then at tight end, I think Robert Tonyan, he's a boom bust. I think he had that one big week and he hasn't really done anything substantial after that. So he's a guy that I get. If he's your best option, you play him. But he's not a guy that I'm looking to start. And then going on to the Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. The Eagles are favored by 3.5 points and the over-under is 44.5. I think this is going to be a very good game for Carson Wentz. They're going against a very, just decimated defense. They're a team that everything looks to be in the Eagles' favor. So I think if you have the Eagles players, you're playing them. So like I said, you're playing Carson Wentz. I think you can play Daniel Jones in a 2-quarterback league. I think this would be an okay option for you. But you're going to play Miles Sanders. If he looks like he's going to play on Sunday. So Miles Sanders should be a must start. I think that Travis Fulgham, if he continues to be the target share leader, so I think Travis Fulgham's a good start. I think you can play Dallas Goedert because he's the tight end that is right now the one that's available. So I think he's a good start. Evan Ingram for the Giants. He continues to be a vulture at tight end position for all the targets, so he should be a guy that you can play. When it comes to the flex position, I do think that you can play Wayne Gallman. Now that's all determined who's active. So Devontae Freeman's inactive. I think Wayne Gallman has a decent flex play this week. I think Sterling Shepard's a flex play, and so is Darius Slayton. Now when it comes to the boom bust candidate, Jalen Reagor's on this list. We saw him play his first game before the bye week. Didn't have a great stat line. I mean, he did score a touchdown, but I want to see more involvement. I want to see what they were seeing in the offseason to make him the number 1 receiver for the Eagles. So he's been dealing with some nagging injuries. Now, how does that play into now having, the health on his side, playing a game, and then having the bye week, and then, what does he do after the bye week? So I had picked him up in my main league, so I hope that he's on my bench, but hopefully he will show me something this week where I can feel comfortable playing him in the flex or play him as my 3rd wide receiver. But I think that if Jalen Reagor's on your waiver wire, I think you should pick him up. And then going on to the Bills versus the Arizona Cardinals. This is an over-under of 56 points. And the Cardinals are surprisingly favored by 2 points in this game. So it's a home game for the Cardinals. I can see why, Kyler Murray has been unstoppable right now. So I do think that this could be one of the most entertaining games of the week. But for the must starts in this game, you're obviously starting Kyler Murray. You're starting Josh Allen. Now, Kenyon Drake has been back at practice. So as of right now, I have Chase Edmonds as a start. That could change by the weekend when I hear more practice reports. I see more of the reports. But right now, it's almost, I think you could still place, if Kenyon Drake does play, I think it's interchangeable who's going to play in the flex or who's going to be a start. But I do think that that's something you have to monitor if you're a Kenyon Drake or a Chase Edmonds owner. But as of right now, Chase Edmonds there as a must start. And obviously, you're starting DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs are those guys that you're going to start anyways. You're not playing any tight end. I think you're sitting any tight end that's on any roster in this game. I just don't think that there's any viable option at tight end. And as a flex, I do think Zach Moss and Devin Singletary have flex appeal. If I had to choose, I'm playing Zach Moss over Devin Singletary. I think we're starting to see, things get handed over to Zach Moss as the starter. So I think that will continue in this game. Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk is a good flex. He's scored 5 touchdowns in the last 3 games. He's been on fire. So I think he can be a good guy that you can play in the flex. And then when it comes to boom bust, I have John Brown, on this list, and Cole Beasley. John Brown had a very good game last week. Most of you guys probably had him on your bench. Now Cole Beasley had a bad game, so Stephon Diggs is the guaranteed guy on this team. It's very hard to determine what's going to happen with John Brown. Usually John Brown would be the number 2 option, but it all depends on who he's lined up against. So right now, I'm not looking to play John Brown or Cole Beasley unless I necessarily have to. And then moving on to the Chargers versus the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins are actually favored by 2.5 points. It's a home game for Miami, and the over/under is 48 points. Obviously, you're starting Justin Herbert, and I do think you can start Tua. I think Tua had a decent outing last week where I feel comfortable where, obviously if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you're going to play him, but I think Tua could have a decent game against the Chargers. But hopefully this is not the game that we get burned by him. But at wide receiver, you're going to play Keenan Allen. I think he's pretty much the only wide receiver that you can play with guaranteed production. You're playing Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki at the tight end position. When it comes to the flex, I have Matt Breida. Matt Breida was the starter that should have taken over from Myles Gaskin when he went on the IR, but he got hurt as well, so he didn't play. But now that he's been practicing, he looks like he's healthy to play. I think that you can play Matt Breida in the flex. Mike Williams, he's been showing a lot of good signs that he is established himself as that number 2 for the Chargers, and he's been staying healthy. So I think that he has he's a decent play in the flex this week. Now, when it comes to the boom bust for these games, I have Joshua Kelly and Kalen Ballage in this because it looks like Justin Jackson's not going to play this week. So if that's the case, then I would say Kalen Ballage would be the one that would start over Joshua Kelly. I mean, Kalen Ballage just looked better than Joshua Kelly, so I think that you can play in a pinch. You can play Kalen Ballage, and he was only last time I checked, he was only 6% owned in league. So if Kalen Ballage is out there, you should try to pick him up. But obviously, if Justin Jackson is active, that changes the plans. But just keep your eyes open for all the inactives and everything for the week. And then moving on to the Denver Broncos versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this is a 52-point over-under, and the Raiders are favored by 5 points in this game. Now, the starting quarterbacks, Derek Carr and Drew Lock, they're only startable in 2 quarterback leagues. I would not play. I think Drew Lock has a decent matchup. I think he could be a little bit of a streamer, but if you're in a 1 quarterback league, but I do think that this pertains more to 2 quarterback leagues to play Carr and play Lock. But at running back, you're playing Josh Jacobs, but the only thing about Josh Jacobs, he just lost his fullback. So the fullback's going to try to play. He hurt his ribs on Sunday. He's going to try to play, but if Josh Jacobs loses his fullback, that could really hurt his fantasy upside. So it's just something to just a little nugget to know, just in case you're not in tune with all the injuries, and if you see Josh Jacobs have a bad game, you're wondering what the heck happened. I think people don't realize how important fullbacks are to a running back, and if that happens and he's inactive, Josh Jacobs could have a slow start to Week 10. And then, I hate to say this, but Melvin Gordon, I have a question mark next to his name. So, Melvin Gordon, to me, he's very hard to trust now. I don't know. I know if you have Melvin Gordon, you have to play him. But do you really want to, though? It's just very hard to trust him. But you have to play him. I think at wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy's a decent play. He showed a lot of potential last week, so he had a good game. So I think this is a good matchup for Jerry Jeudy. At tight end, I think Darren Waller and Noah Fant are must starts. At the flex, I think Phillip Lindsay, based on how they do a running back by committee, I think that Phillip Lindsay deserves to be in the flex based on your roster structure. And then when it comes to the boom bust candidates, I still think Tim Patrick, he's had decent games. He's scored touchdowns, but he's a guy that are you concerned about target share? Are you concerned about the lack of receptions? So I think that's valid. And then Henry Ruggs, he's my other boom bust receiver. He's hard to determine the involvement because we know he doesn't get a lot of volume, but he can go off for a long touchdown and save you your fantasy week. So he's definitely a boom bust for me for this game. And then moving on to the San Francisco 49ers versus the New Orleans Saints. There's an over-under of 50 points, and the Saints are favored by 10 points. Now, in this game, you're going to start Drew Brees. He's a must-start. Alvin Kamara. Jerick McKinnon, I have him as a start in this game because, with Raheem Mostert being out still, Jeff Wilson's out. I don't think JaMychal Hasty is the guy. I think it leans more towards Jerick McKinnon. So I have Jerick McKinnon as a start this week in this game. Obviously, Michael Thomas, Jared Cook, I think those are good starts. When it comes to who I'm going to sit, I'm not playing Nick Mullins. Not a good matchup for him. I don't think he's a viable option anyway in any one quarterback league. At the flex, I think Latavius Murray continues to have flex appeal. We saw last week that Alvin Kamara didn't really have to do much, and Latavius Murray played a lot more. So I do think that if you really need that upside, it's limited, but at least you can get some flex value out of Murray. And I think Emmanuel Sanders, he had a touchdown last week. I think that Emmanuel Sanders continues to be a decent flex in deeper leagues. And then, like I said, with my boom bust candidates, I have JaMychal Hasty here. I don't think it's hard to determine who's going to be the guy. Just like the Colts backfield from Thursday night, you just don't know who Kyle Shanahan wants to be the guy. So he's a boom bust for me. Brandon Ayuk, he's a boom bust for me as well. And then Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed came back last week, but he had under 2 PPR points. So I know he had involvement when Kittle went out earlier in the season, but how does that translate to this game? So we saw Gronk get shut down last week against the Saints. Does Jordan Reed get shut down this week? So we'll see, but definitely just for the Saints, there's more guaranteed starts than the 49ers. And then moving on to the Bengals versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this is going to be a very interesting game because I think it all determines on what happens with Big Ben. But the over-under is 47.5, and the Steelers are favored by 7.5 points. Now, if you're in 2 quarterback leagues, I think Big Ben and Joe Burrow are good picks. Now, I do think you can start James Conner. It looks like Joe Mixon's going to be out again this week, so that means that Giovanni Bernard should get the start. He should have a decent game. I think you play Tyler Boyd. I think you can play any of the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers. You play T. Higgins. You can play Eric Ebron. And I think the one guy that I'm going to sit in this game is A.J. Green. I just don't see him having a good game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But what I want to say about this game is that, like I have said, you can start any of the Steelers wide receivers. I think this is a very good matchup. The problem is, does Big Ben play on Sunday? Now, we know that Big Ben's been in isolation because of the high-risk contact with Vance McDonald. As of right now, he has no positive test. So that means that he's on track to play on Sunday as long as he stays negative for COVID. But if he is positive for COVID and he has to not play this game and has to sit, how does that hurt? I mean, that definitely hurts the production of Deontay Johnson, Juju, and Chase Claypool. So just something you may have to pivot just in case if it is that Big Ben can't play. So that's just a disclaimer I want to put out there for this game. I think you can play a lot of the Steelers players, but have expectations altered if you see Big Ben out. And then going on to the Seattle Seahawks versus the Los Angeles Rams. This is an over-under of 55.5. This is a Rams favorite. They're favored by 1.5 points. Now, obviously, you're starting Russell Wilson in this game. Jared Goff, you could start him in this game. I mean, the Seahawks have a bad passing defense, so I think Jared Goff could have a good game against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I do have Chris Carson on this list. It's still a 50-50 shot that he's going to be active, but if he's active, you play him. Now, Darrell Henderson, same thing. He's been dealing with some injuries. It's still uncertain if he's going to play for Week 10, but if he does, you play him. DK Metcalf, obviously, you're going to start him. You're starting Tyler Lockett. You're starting Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. Now, when it comes to players I'm not playing Tyler Higbee or Joe Everett. This was one of my, I had Tyler Higbee as a breakout tight end this year. it still could happen at some point, but maybe he does what he does last year, where he just turned it on in the last 4 weeks of the season and won a lot of people their championships. But as of right now, he's just a guy who just can't play. He's just not getting the targets, and it's just a hit or miss on who's going to get the touchdown. Is it going to be Everett or Higbee? So I'm not playing any of the tight ends, and then obviously you're not playing Greg Olsen. Now when it comes to a boom bust, I have Malcolm Brown here. Malcolm Brown continues to be involved in the offense, but who's going to get the touchdown? Will it be Darrell Henderson? Is it going to be Cam Akers? Is it going to be Malcolm Brown? But I do think that Malcolm Brown, out of all three of them, I think definitely has. I think he has the most secured playing time. So I think that he could have some appeal there. And then going on to the Sunday night football game, we got the Baltimore Ravens versus the New England Patriots. This is an over/under of 43.5, and the Ravens are favored by 7 points. So this is a kind of it looks like a big matchup, but then you look at what we have available fantasy-wise, this game doesn't really have a lot to offer you. I mean, you do have Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson is not as explosive like he was last year. It's still, he had said something on Thursday about how the defenses are calling their plays, on the field. So the defenses are seeing them very vanilla. They're not really surprised on what the Ravens are doing. Like last year, they did anything they wanted against anybody, and we saw Lamar Jackson have a great season, obviously. But this year, it's just not the same. And I just wonder if they're just not being innovative enough to kind of throw the defenses off. But, I think against this defense, you still have to play Lamar Jackson. You can't bench him. Now, Cam Newton, is he reliable? Is he the guy that you saw? He had a good game or a better game on Monday night against the Jets. But now he's playing a very tough defense against the Ravens. So if you have to play him, I would not play Cam Newton, but it's just a tough matchup for him. And then at tight end, Mark Andrews, I mean, he hasn't been doing very well this year, but you can't bench him. You have to continue to play him. I mean, you draft him as the top tight end. He's not giving you that back in return right now, but you don't want to be the guy who benches Mark Andrews and he blows up. So you have to play Mark Andrews. When it comes to the flex, I have J.K. Dobbins here, I have Gus Edwards, and I have Mark Ingram, because Mark Ingram returned to practice. Does he take the starting role away from J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards? So if this is a backfield you can avoid, I would avoid it, because you have no idea who's going to be the guy who gets the majority of the carries. And then also as a flex, I got Damian Harris. He did leave the game Monday because of he got hit in the chest and he got taken out of the game. So he still is limited in practice, but he should be able to play on Sunday. But I think he has a decent flex appeal. Same thing with Marquise Brown. He's not the guy that we had hoped for. He shows signs of explosiveness, but he's just not. He's not really giving you that fancy production. He's almost a droppable player. I've seen him drop to multiple leagues. It's just hard to trust a guy in an offense that's just not really doing that well overall. But I do think Jacoby Myers for the Patriots is a good play. I think that we saw him with over 40% target share on Monday, and right now Cam Newton's. He's locked into Cam Newton's locked into Jacoby Myers. So I think that he definitely has some decent flex appeal there. And then moving on to the Monday night football game, we got the Vikings versus the Bears. Now the Vikings are favored by 2.5 points. The over/under is 43.5. Now, obviously in this game, you're starting Dalvin Cook. You're starting your Adam Thielens, your Allen Robinsons, Justin Jeffersons. You're starting those guys. Jimmy Graham, I think he's earned the right to be put in your lineup as a starter. He's done enough throughout the year to warrant a start. So I do think that could be a decent play. Now, when it comes to Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, like I said, I've been saying this all year, Chicago has a good pass defense. So have low expectations of what the two receivers can do, and hoping that they do something and score, because I was thinking A.J. Brown was not going to have a good game against the Bears last week, and he ended up scoring a touchdown and having over 100 yards. So these guys do have the capability of doing that, but just have low expectations. Hopefully, when you're going into Monday night, if you're behind, you're not behind too much, because you don't want to be behind by 20 points and have one of these guys left to play and you lose by a few points because of the matchup. So just a little nugget there. And then obviously when it comes to who I'm going to sit, I'm not playing Kirk Cousins. I'm not playing Nick Foles. And at tight end, I'm not going to play Irv Smith Jr. I know he had 2 touchdowns last week, but I can't see that being consistent. I just don't. I want to see more targets. I want to see more receptions on top of that as well. I just want to be. I don't have a touchdown dependent tight end, so I'm not going to play him this week. And when it comes to boom bust, I actually have David Montgomery here. David Montgomery has not been what we had hoped. He has the opportunity, right? He has the workload in that backfield, but it's just not showing up. So hopefully he has a good game. If you have David Montgomery, it's probably your best option at running back, other than whatever else you have left on your bench. But you have to play David Montgomery in this game. So it's ugly, but at least he has a decent matchup against the Vikings. The Vikings are not as good as a defense as they once were. So David Montgomery could have a surprising game, but you have to play him and just have the expectations where, it's a boom bust. So if he does well, you're ecstatic. If he doesn't do bad, you're like, well, I expected that. So, all right, so that's all my starts and sits for Week 10. That's all the matchups. But if you have any start-sit questions, please leave a comment below. I try to get to everybody as fast as I can, so please leave a comment. And if you can't leave a comment on the YouTube video, then email me at chip@gridironfantasyfootball.com. I'll love to answer any of your questions there as well. But if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us over on Twitter and Facebook at the Gridiron Pod. You can find us on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So, do me a favor, hit subscribe on the YouTube, hit subscribe on the podcast, so we can start to build this community for fantasy football. I just really love interacting with everybody who asks me questions. So, support the show and hit subscribe. But that's it for today. Make sure to come back to the YouTube channel on Saturday when I do my injury updates and give you all of my pivots just in case there are players out and who you can try to grab. So don't forget to watch that on Saturday. So good luck for Week 10. I hope you're able to win. And we'll see you on Monday when I react to all the Week 10 matchups. Have a good day and good luck.